Welcome back to the McCann Dogs podcast. It's season 3 and episode 1. And if you feel like your dog's too free and you're not having so much fun because the dog's too free, that's what we're going to talk about today in the episode. And actually, as I searched for rhymes in my head, I would never be a good rapper.
But you kind of nailed that.
It
was all right.
I did have the words in front of me. You think I'd be a better script reader, but the reality is that something that a lot of people struggle with, and I think this is a pretty common problem for a lot of new dog owners, new puppy owners, is they might be giving their dog too much freedom too early. And today on the podcast, we have Instructor Robbie with us. How's it going, Instructor Robbie?
It's going well, thank you.
Good. And she's actually written, it was Robbie that wrote this article, right?
It was, yeah, absolutely.
She's actually written an article for our website, for the blog. And if you're unaware of the blog, maybe this is your first time hearing about it, make sure you check out McCannDogs.com. We have an entire blog section where Instructor Shannon and Instructor Robbie have written articles. Instructor Shannon has, how many articles do you have in here?
I don't even know. I was at like 250
at
some point or something. Like it blows my mind.
I know.
You start with one and then suddenly.
Yeah. And a big part of those articles is solving some of the common challenges that dog owners have. You know, we get to see and hear from and talk to so many dog owners from all over the world every single week that it gives us a unique perspective on dog training. You know, it's not just theory. Theory is important, but it's not just theory. It's the actual practical application of dog training. And that's what I'm quite proud of as an instructor here, is the amount of experience, the amount of students that we've helped, and the amount of information that we can pass along to you as our podcast audience. Now, I think in summary, let's talk maybe about some of the problems that we're going to solve today, Shannon. You know, what might be an indication that, maybe I've given this dog or puppy a little bit too much freedom too early.
Yeah, a lot of that will depend on how old the dog is. So when we start out with our young puppies, we want to make sure that we're managing and controlling their freedom as much as possible so that they're not learning the wrong things when we can't watch them. They're not learning the wrong things when we haven't taught them the skills that they need to know yet. And this is a really timely thing. I'm glad that we're starting season 3 talking about giving too much freedom, because that was one of the side effects of COVID and people being in a home situation where their dogs were getting to have a lot more freedom than they normally would have if they'd gone to work and been crated for the day, etc. And a lot of the times that leads to really bad behavior.
Robbie, is this the first article that you've published on the McCann Dogs blog, or have you written more?
It is not the first. It is the second, actually.
Okay. And what prompted you to write this? You know, what did you see in your students? What did you see in the, dog sphere that made you, that prompted you to write this article?
Yeah, it's something that we talk about all the time with our students. We're always telling our students, make sure that you're not giving your dog too much freedom. And to be honest, I never really gave it much thought in terms of, how people were perceiving that, until one day I read an email from a student who then very clearly made it obvious to me that these students may not truly understand what we mean by giving them too much freedom. So I thought, I'm going to write an article, and hopefully I can set this straight so that people have a better understanding as to what we mean when we say freedom for dogs.
This is such an important topic, and this is one of the major mistakes that I made as a new dog owner that brought me to McCann Dogs, is not really understanding when my dog was ready for freedom or more freedom. I just had this sense, I had that Disney dog model that I could bring my dog home and she'd get along with my other dog and life would be grand, and I could, get away with, I don't know, less work than I thought, I needed, but I could have gotten away with a little bit less work than I ended up doing if I had have controlled her freedom a little bit more. Robbie, you say in the first header in your title, in your article, is it's not just about space. And let's talk about that a little bit. What does that mean?
Absolutely. The number of times that people say to me, well, I have my dog confined to a room, and that's a good start, but still in that physical space, even though it may not be a very large space, it still gives the opportunity to the dog to make their own choices. And the dog learns that I do this when I want, this when I want. I come here, I go there, I chew this, I chew that, I lie down, I stand at the window and I bark at people as they walk by. It just gives the dog too many opportunities to make poor choices when we're not right there in order to help the dog understand that what they're doing is not necessarily appropriate. So a lot of times people give their dogs the space in a room, or they barricade the dog to a certain area in the house, and they figure that they're reducing the dog's freedom, but in reality, they're still allowing the dog too much freedom, too much opportunity to make their own choices, which then leads to all sorts of problems later on down the line, because the dog essentially learns they make up the rules. And then at some point in time, the human steps in and tries to give the dog direction. And then that human is met with resistance or reluctance on the dog's part. And sometimes even the dog will react aggressively because they've learned, I do what I want, when I want, and who the heck are you to be suddenly telling me what to do? So it just creates all sorts of problems for people to have to deal with, especially as the dogs are maturing, and that's an important time to be able to control their freedom and make sure that we're not giving them those opportunities to make poor choices. So it's about not just restricting the physical space, but restricting what we're actually allowing the dogs to do at any one point in time.
Such a psychological impact.
It is, absolutely.
I think one of the things that people don't understand yet, or if you're having, multiple little challenges with your dog training, the thing that you might not quite see yet is how small changes can have a big impact. For example, managing your dog better, using a crate is a great example. So with my 2-year-old dog, when I brought her to McCann Dogs, I got all sorts of great information. And one of the most important pieces of information was you need to start using a crate. You need to manage that dog better. And what happened for me was that I started to see, and at the time I didn't even really recognize it until I started to teach other students. But what happened for me was I took away all of those opportunities that Robbie just talked about, to bark, to play with the other dog in the house who was not into it. In hindsight, didn't appreciate the fact that I'd brought another dog home. That Deegan couldn't go around and chew all the things, whether they were toys or not, didn't really make a difference. But what was so important was that when I brought her out of the crate to do stuff with her, it was with me. And initially my perception was, well, I don't, want to have to use a crate forever, because at the time I thought, well, I guess, if I'm using a crate, I guess this is just what happens from now on. But what I started to see was that using a management tool at the right time would allow me in the future to give her more freedom. And I'd rushed that freedom far too early. And, I think you made an important point, Robbie, in talking about, the dog may have this perception like, well, this is my space, this is my thing. And we are trying to let dogs know, we're trying to teach dogs how to live in our world. That's the reality of all of this. And using freedom in the right way can be a powerful way to reward the dog. It's also a great way to, unsupervised, allow them to practice some of the wrong things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And once they're at the point where they're adult enough and they know enough to make the right choices, that assumption that a lot of people make when we say the dog needs to be better managed, the dog needs to be in a crate, a lot of the times the assumption that comes along with that is this is forever. And it's not. It's during training. It's until they know enough to make better choices, at which point they've earned the freedom, and we can allow them the freedom, knowing that they're not going to damage themselves, they're not going to damage the house, and we're not going to end up losing control of them because they're so busy making up their own rules.
The other thing is, or perception is that, well, this is a punishment. I wouldn't put my kids in a cage, which is the most ridiculous thing that people say. I find it so funny. Unfortunately, it's just the way it's, how we're seeing this as humans. But of course, you wouldn't put children in a cage. We need to be thinking about the dog, what's best for the dog in this instance.
Right. And most of us, when we think about things like gentle parenting, if you've ever come across that term, where you basically let the child make all of their own decisions and govern themselves, most of us look at that and go, why on earth would anybody think that was a good way to raise a child?
Right.
And, you know, but we think the opposite with dogs.
Right.
That we think that we can dump them into this situation where we let them make all their own choices and that they're going to make good choices that align with what we like, which is just not realistic.
Totally. There's a lot. We have a new puppy in the house. If you've seen our YouTube channel, you've probably seen a little Five Alive running around, and he's such an adorable little dog. And, you know, we're working our butts off. One day, I expect to see him on the world stage with Kale, you know,
Absolutely.
competing in a world championship. But right now, we are focused on basically three things. We are looking at time supervising, time managing, and time training. And it's a lot, you know, it is a lot, but luckily management is there to fill in some of these gaps, to give us some breathing room so that we can continue to do the things that we normally do. Robbie, let's talk a little bit about how management fills in the gaps with, you know, for the opportunity for your dog to have freedom.
Absolutely. So when we're training dogs, one of the most important things is to establish a solid relationship with the dog. And the way that we do that is through management and training and supervision. So when we're not able to actively supervise the dog, then that's when we want to put the dog in the crate. We want to make sure that that dog's not given the opportunity to make poor choices when we're not right there to tell them, hey, you can't do that. So what we do is we manage them by preventing them from making mistakes. And then when we are able to supervise them, we supervise them closely. And I'm sure you've heard of us talk about our house leash or house line. When the dog or the puppy is out with us and we're actively supervising, we have a house leash or we have a house line on the dog so that we are able to get control of the dog in a situation where we need to get control. So, for example, if the dog decides they're going to go bark at the window as someone is walking by, we need a way of stopping that or managing the situation. So we would get the leash, get the line, move the dog away, give the dog something else to do. So we manage the dog, prevent them from making mistakes. So our goal is to prevent them from making mistakes when we can't supervise them. When we can supervise them, we're watching them closely, we're managing them well, and we're teaching them skills at the same time. And all of these things help build a relationship with the dog. And when you think about it, all of this training really does come down to relationship. You know, if the dog looks at us as leader and you look to us for direction in life, life will be great for both the dog and for the human. But if we allow the dog to have too much freedom and we allow them to make their own choices, then we're setting the dog up for failure. We're teaching them essentially that they make up the rules, they're in charge, and they don't need to listen to us. So that management part of things is so important, especially when you're dealing with a young puppy or a young adolescent dog or even an adult dog that doesn't understand the rules. Our goal is to manage them well so that we can help them learn how to make good choices in life.
Yeah, and that's such an important point for getting away from being angry with our dogs, being frustrated with our dogs, using a lot of correction with our dogs because they're making poor choices. If we manage their behavior, we set them up for success, we end up in a situation where rather than telling them they're wrong, and having to try to fix that somehow, we're directing their behavior and we're getting them into that stream of right, which makes them want to keep doing that thing that we like because it earned valuable things somehow. So this line of thinking is so important for making sure that your dog learns the right things and enjoys learning from you too. And that is going to, Robbie, I'm sure you'll absolutely agree with that, with the idea that that is going to be such a boost for your relationship if your dog enjoys the process of training.
Absolutely. We want our dogs to enjoy doing things with us. You know, if they're not enjoying their time that they're spending with us, then, you know, what's the point of having a dog? We have our dogs because we want to do things with them. We want them to enjoy doing things with us. And so that's where that management and that training comes in. And until we've got things working really well for us and the dog understands that we're the leader, we need to make sure that we're not putting them in situations where they're allowed to make poor choices. And usually those situations are situations where we've just given them too much freedom that they're just not quite ready for.
I think something that people often overlook is the fact that dogs, and we say this often, dogs are always learning. And when they're making choices and they're doing things that make them feel good, and maybe that's peeing in the living room because, you know, that sensation is, it feels good, feels right. It's a lot better than going out in the cold, especially here in Canada when it's icy and snowy. Yeah. Or, you know, maybe it is chewing on something that they shouldn't. You know, your dog is learning it's no different than us teaching, using a conditioner for using our yes, feeding the dog feels good. So they make that choice again.
Yep.
If they chew on a shoe and it tastes good, or it makes, their mouth feel good, it feels good. So they'll do it again. I had a comment somebody sent to me the other day about the idea of errorless learning is ridiculous, and it's not untrue. We set our dogs up to be correct. We set our dogs up to be successful. But what's so important is that when they make an error, we're there to give them the right information.
Yeah, the goal is never errorless learning. That's just not realistic. The goal is minimize the errors so that the learning process itself is enjoyable enough for all of the creatures involved that everyone wants to come back for more.
Thoughts on this? My thought is that the errors are just as important as some of the great choices we allow our dogs to make, as long as we're there. Yeah. So let's talk about that for a minute, because I know a lot of people are thinking like, well, I thought we had house training sorted out and my dog peed in the corner. I thought he had stopped doing this behavior, but then it happened. Well, now what? What are the next steps for those dog owners, Robbie?
Yeah, definitely. We want the dog to make some mistakes when we're there supervising them, and we can tell them, this is just not appropriate. The idea of the dog never making a mistake, well, it sounds lovely, but it's very unrealistic, because first of all, it's not going to happen. Dogs are going to make mistakes. It's part of life, and making mistakes is part of learning. And in order for the dog to clearly understand what's right and what's not right, they need to make some mistakes. So we need to be there to reinforce them when they're making good choices, but we also need to be there to let them know when they're making a poor choice. So we use the example of, peeing in the house. Well, when the dog pees or poops in the house, they feel better. It's a relief for them. And if we're not right there to say, no, you can't do that, then the dog is learning that it's acceptable. That behavior is acceptable because it earns them relief. It earns them a reward. So we want the dogs to make some mistakes. We're not looking for perfection. We don't want that right now. We want to help mold the dog and teach the dog what it is we want them to do by reinforcing the good things and then being there to correct them. And when I say correct, I don't mean anything negative or nasty. Just redirect them. Let them know that you cannot do that. So if my dog was peeing in the house as a puppy, all I would do is I would simply interrupt the puppy, scoop the puppy up, bring the puppy outside, let the puppy finish outside. So we're letting the dog know you can't do that, but this is what I would like you to do instead. So we want the dogs to understand through trial and error what works and what doesn't. And the only way it's going to work out properly is if we're there to supervise the puppy.
Right. The other idea that I wanted to talk about with errorless learning and setting things up the way that we do is that we end up in a situation where we give the puppy some understanding of what's right first. Yeah. And then later on down the road, they might make a mistake. If we hadn't done any of the teaching where they got to be right first, well, how do we direct them from the mistake in any sort of way that's effective? Whereas right now, if I've spent a lot of time making sure my pup first doesn't have accidents in the house and he has a clear understanding that going outside is a desirable thing to do, now when I go back in, and inevitably every puppy is going to have an accident in the house, but when my puppy has that accident, I can very quickly rely on his history of reinforcement and knowing that going outside is right to help him understand what the error was. And again, that's another way that I'm going to make sure that I end up minimizing the errors that my puppy experiences.
Absolutely. And it's no different really than us teaching dogs how to respond properly and do things for us on a loose leash. If we're micromanaging the dog all of the time and we never allow them to make a mistake and then say to them, you can't do that, they're never going to learn. And as a matter of fact, we're doing them a disservice. We're only teaching them what to do, but never giving them any direction in terms of what not to do. And that's so important for a dog to understand. They need to know there are boundaries. If you think about it, if you go to work every day and every day your job description changes and you don't know what your job is, just imagine how stressful that would be. And that's the same sort of situation that your dog faces when you are not giving your dog good, clear information.
Yeah, that would be awful.
And I feel like for a lot of people, when we finally get a chance to talk to them and coach them with their training, they've been looking at it entirely the opposite way. Like, I can't stop my dog from doing this thing. How do I stop my dog from this? To be honest, a large majority of the people that end up following us, subscribing to us on YouTube, are trying to solve a specific problem. And we need to talk about, well, what's the foundation of understanding? that's the opposite of that? What's the incompatible behavior? What's the other thing? What's the thing you want your dog to do that's the opposite of what they are doing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, if you want to get advice to have the guidance of these superstar professional dog trainers like Instructor Shannon, like Instructor Robbie, make sure you check out our online training programs. We have students from 53 countries, people from all over the world with all different breeds, all different ages of dogs. And these guys are in there, coaching people to have that dog that you always wanted, to have that dream dog, to go for a walk, to, do all this was my experience. It's so easy for me to say this because this was me. I had my dog. I felt like didn't have enough time to fix all these problems. And then I came to McCann Dogs and it changed the course of my life with my dog. It just allowed me to do so much. So if you're interested in getting great advice from either of these two amazing dog trainers, make sure you check us out in the description below. For dogs under 5 months, it's our Puppy Essentials program. For dogs 5 months and older, it's our Life Skills program. Instructor Robbie, I need to thank you for joining us today. It's been a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to future podcasts with you.
Thank you. Thank you. It was lots of fun.
And Instructor Shannon, as always, we're back. We are back and having fun.
3,
absolutely.
Yay.
And I want to thank you guys for listening. On that note, I'm Ken.
I'm Shannon.
Happy training, guys. Bye for now. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the McCann Dogs podcast. And if you'd like some more training resources, be sure to check us out on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook at McCann Dogs. And if you'd like to train with us online, be sure to check out the show notes below for our My Dog Can online training program, where we know in just a few weeks your dog will become a well-behaved family member. Until then, happy training.